let me ask you a question, Ryan. What do you think about this Simic Mass Manipulation deck, or the Mass Manipulation deck in general?
I think that they are really carving out a spot in the metagame with everybody going big and all these planeswalkers and huge effects. You just turn things right around with manipulation. They're really poor against mono red. If you can dodge that matchup, though, you're sitting pretty.
Well, with mono red being one of the more prominent decks here in day 2, the #1 overall played deck with, I think, almost 30 copies. Seems like a tough order, but Collins Mullen here with a 901 start, and his only draw so far in Standard has a pretty great Standard record so far.
Yeah, he has actually managed to dodge the red matchup entirely, which is really what you want to do.
Nice.
In this matchup here, though, we see him really accelerating his mana. This is what the deck does. So he made his first 3 land drops, Land War Elf, Paradise Druid, really off to the races. Rosum did have the turn 2 hero of Precinct 1. Here's Teferi Time Raveler, make up a little bit of ground there, bouncing the Land War Elves.
Yeah, that's a pretty good draw from Rosum. That Time Raveler allows him to slow down the acceleration from Mullen's, and then creates a token to actually protect the Time Raveler as the game progresses.
And this was a really aggressive attack. We saw Rosum attack his hero into Mullen's Paradise Druid. Mullen took the trade.
Yeah, he took the trade, and I was actually surprised from both sides. I was surprised on the attack, and then even more surprised that Collins traded, because mana is so important in this deck. But he also recognizes that here Precinct 1 is the easiest way for things to get out of hand, and the easiest way for the Esper Superheroes deck to basically overpower something like a mass manipulation as the game goes on.
Plenty more mana, though, was available in Mullen's hand. We see Land War Elf and Incubation Druid showing up, as well as a Memorial to Genius. Rosum will record the first life total change. He'll shock to 18 and then go back to 21 off this Basilica Bellhaunt. Hinterland Harbor discarded for Mullen.
All right, now Mullins has the ability to untap with that Druid. If he so chooses, he can put 3 counters on it and start churning out a lot more mana. If he has a land to play for the turn, he can also cast a Tamio and start ticking up on that and dig for mass manipulation or similar effects.
The hand currently looks to be Jadelight Ranger, Tamio, Collector of Tales, and Breeding Pool. So it looks like he has the mana if he wants to just cast both of his spells.
Yeah, looks like that's what's going to happen here.
We'll start with evolving the Incubation Druid.
I want to point out it's interesting. Collins actually had the option, I believe, to discard either Breeding Pool or Hinterland Harbor, and he actually chose to discard the Hinterland Harbor, even though he has a force on the battlefield already. I think that's just basically a nod to the fact that Nissa Who Shakes the World doubles all your force mana.
All right, so he cast Jadelight Ranger here. That's going to pick up 2 lands off the Explorer. He'll play Breeding Pool tapped and pass back to Rosum. That's a very good point, though. The deck really does want to prioritize cards with that forest land type.
Yeah, for sure. Every small amount of mana matters in this matchup, because every 2 mana you get an extra card stolen with that mass manipulation.
And this is an interesting juncture now for Rosum. Now everybody knows that the Simic deck is heavy on mass manipulation. There's some question that if Rosum even wants to cast another Planeswalker on this turn.
Yeah, but he is doing it, and he's going to minus on the Incubation Druid, though, and that actually makes the mass manipulation a lot worse.
Yep, that's definitely true. See the Druid tucked away by the Teferi Hero of Dominaria. Will go back to Collins Mullen. Notably, the Time Raveler for Rosum is also back on 3, so whenever he wants, he gets another bounce from that one. Mullen will start his turn with a Growth Spiral. Plenty of lands in the hand. He'll put a forest onto the battlefield. Still has his land draw for turn. Still has that Tamio floating around in the hand. So it's 2 lands and Tamio, the current holdings. Got an inkling to what he might want to look for with that Tamio?
Well, the Incubation Druid is still on top of his deck, right? So he could just guarantee a hit and plus on that. And with the land in hand, I believe he hasn't played a land yet for turn, can still cast it. He's up a land drop because of that Growth Spiral on turn 2, I believe. So a guaranteed hit on Incubation Druid, but can go for the Gusto and look for something a bit more powerful if he so chooses.
With a hand of 2 lands, it would be a pretty big miss if he didn't find a spell here. You see, he has decided to tick up.
Yeah, and this is the decision, because you can guarantee yourself a Druid here, an Incubation Druid, but you know, how good is an Incubation Druid? It costs a lot of mana to really turn it on, and he could just start digging, like plussing, looking for exactly Nissa Who Shakes the World or
Actually named a Hydroid Krasis. It's going to be a miss. He milled over a Nissa and that Incubation Druid as well as a Growth Spiral.
No, I like that one. That one gives you a bit of pressure against these Planeswalkers, as well as a few extra cards. So that's a pretty nice name, and something like Mass Manipulation, maybe not as good in the spot.
All right, back over to Jonathan Rosum. He'll put his Teferi Hero of Dominaria up to 2, draw a card. He's going to cash in the Time Raveler, or maybe not. He's going to think about it anyway.
You're going to have a good think.
A lot of decision points for these Esper decks.
That's what happens when your deck has 14 plus Planeswalkers in it. You get a lot of different choices.
Right, lands on -3, bounce the Llanowar Elves, draw a card. Godless Shrine, you'll shock down to 19.
Well, I think we're about to see a Command the Dreadhorde here. That's going to take a Nissa Who Shakes the World, probably going to bring back Teferi Time Raveler from his own graveyard. This is a huge swing, and one of the reasons why these Esper Superheroes decks play 1 or 2 copies of the card in their deck.
So Nissa, Teferi Time Raveler, that hero of Precinct 1 he traded away earlier in the game, grabs 2 mana creatures in Incubation Druid and Paradise Druid. So this is 14 life we're looking at here. It'll go to 7.
Yep, and then he also gets to use the Nissa Who Shakes the World to untap one of his lands, turning it into a 3/3. And on the following turn, he's going to have access to just a boatload of mana. He also gets another bounce off the Teferi Time Raveler, which clears the way for some attackers on this Tamio. The Basilica Bellhunt and the 3/3 land are going to be able to knock it down.
Yeah, so clears away that, animates his land, attack at Tamio. Still has that 1 token hanging out, knocks Mullen to 19 as well.
Yeah, this was just an insane turn for Rosum here. It's going to be really hard for Collins to get back in this game. He really needed to hit something like a Hydro Krasis on the previous turn, but now he's probably going to need a ramp turn this turn, and then followed by Mass Manipulation on the next turn. And that might even not be enough even then.
Jadelight Ranger is where he will start. Hydroid Krasis, the first reveal on the Explorer, puts that one in the graveyard.
Yeah, just not good enough anymore.
Draws a forest. There's another Tamio Collector of Tales, plus that one to 6. Puts Tamio and 3 lands into the graveyard. And cast Llanowar Elves. We'll go to Jonathan Rosum. We'll get confirmation on the name from that Tamio.
It's not extremely relevant, but I want to know what he's digging for. But turns out it was Mass Manipulation. We did just get confirmation on that.
Yeah, you would need a big swing. That makes a lot of sense. All right, Rosum's going to put his Hero of Dominaria up to 3, Time Raveler up to 2. Probably make one of these lands into a creature.
Yeah, I mean, he could swing in for a huge chunk of damage here between the Bellhunt being 3 power, multiple lands having 3 power. Even the Paradise Druid has 2 power here, Precinct 1. You know, his hand is stacked because he's just been drawing cards with Time Raveler and Hero of Dominaria over and over again. So heavily in favor of Rosum, but let's see if Collins can figure out a way out.
He'll cast a second Hero of Precinct 1. Continuing to snowball his advantage. Cleaning up the battlefield a little bit. There's a lot of permanents to keep track of.
Yeah, it's one of the reasons why the standard format is so complex. You know, there's so many different permanent types seeing play with powerful enchantments like Experimental Frenzy, Planeswalkers with static effects, things like that, you know.
All right, here's an Oath of Kaya that's going to make 2 tokens, clear out that Jadelight Ranger, Rosum up to 8. Shocks off of a Hallowed Fountain down to 6. Perhaps something to clear this Llanowar Elf as the blocker. Maybe another Teferi Time Raveler in hand.
Maybe. Maybe just once. I don't know if Rosum actually wants to attack the Tamio this turn. I guess probably because Mass Manipulation is basically the only way out.
All right, so he's just going to go to combat, thinking about how he wants to line up his attacks. All right, rewind a little bit. He's going to use that Nissa, fire up another land.
Yeah, we're going to send, it looks like, 9 at the Tamio. That way a chump block with the elf still doesn't save it. and then 3 at face, and Elf is just going to sit back and watch as things kind of collapse here for Collins Mullen.
Yeah, Tamio down, Mullen to 16, post-combat. Rosum tapping some mana. Basilica Bellhaunt, up to 9, discard your card.
Yeah, and with just a bunch of mana on the battlefield, let's see, Mass Manipulation right now can only be cast for X equals 2.
And Rosum has quite a few more non-land permanents than that.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think that a Mass Manipulation for 2 is even worthwhile.
Yeah, there's just too many creatures, right? Even from 16, those heroes, they made a bunch more tokens on that turn. Yeah, Mullen just has to pick them up. John Rosum up in game 1.
Yeah, just a really impressive showing there from the Esper Superheroes deck from Jonathan Rosum. You really saw the strength of Command the Dreadhorde there in a fair strategy, I would say. Just playing normal Magic and just having the 6-mana tempo spell that got back a reasonable number of cards and buffered his life total with things like Basilica Bellhaunt, and you just saw the strength of it, brought back 5 or 6 cards, and 2 or 3 of which were Planeswalkers, and just completely dominated Mullen.
Right, players going to sideboarding. We'll start on John Rossum's side. A lot of good-looking options here. The sideboard is 3 Lyra Dawnbringer, 2 Duress, 2 Dovin's Veto, 2 Elder Spells, 2 Cry of the Carnarium, 2 Kaya's Wraths, and 2 Nightveil Predators. What looks good here?
So we talked about this matchup a little bit yesterday. I like kind of transitioning away from Hero Precinct 1. While it does potentially give you some ways to pressure Planeswalkers, I like this kind of transition to a control deck where you have very few creatures in your deck and just kind of win with your Planeswalkers. I think that goes well with things like the Elder Spell. You want Dovin's Veto, Duress, and then you want these Cry of the Carnariums and Kaya's Wrath to kind of clean up those mana-producing creatures. We've seen Paradise Druid, Llanowar Elf, and Incubation Druid all susceptible to that Cry of the Carnarium, and Kaya's Wrath cleans those up, plus the 3/3s generated from Anissa Who Shakes the World. I'm curious to see how Rosum sideboards, but I would love that transition to a more purish control deck that we're used to seeing out of these Esper decks.
So you see fewer unique options on Mullen's side of things. A lot more 4-ofs, what have you. His sideboard, 4 Ripjaw Raptor, 3 Thorn Lieutenant, an Entrancing Melody, 4 Thrashing Brontodon, and 3 Negates. What do you think his approach will be?
I think he needs to go the opposite route. I think he needs to be a little more aggressive, utilize things like Negate, and try to have like an alternate beatdown plan so that Nisu Shakes the World making 3/3s is occasionally enough to get the job done. If he does go that route, I love the Negates. The Thorn Lieutenants are okay, but I could see a world where he also boards in Thrashing Brontodon just because it's a 3-power creature for 3. I don't think he has a lot of truly bad cards in his main deck. But he may want to try to get some of the mana ramp creatures out of the deck, like Incubation Druid, just because they're a bit mopey against things like Cry of the Carnarium. And if you expect that, you just have to be prepared to transition.
So we're really feeling the impact of War of the Spark on the standard format. Both of these decks playing a ton of Planeswalkers, and that's because War of the Spark is a set with a lot of Planeswalkers. See a ton of powerful options there. The set is live. You can order some cards today. Go to SRCGames.com/war. Singles, boxes.
Trade binders with Nicol Bolas, the God Eternal on it. Playmat with Commence the End Game. Playmat with Bolas' Evil Plan. Or
Deliver unto Evil.
Just a lot of really cool merch at go.starcgames.com/war. You can pick that up today.
I like that full art Gideon Blackblade sleeve.
Oh, those are nice.
Yeah, that's rad.
Yeah, I like those. The Liliana Dreadhorde General deck box is cool. So that's her full-blown, covered in the tattoos that signify like her, I want to say her servitude to Nicol Bolas, like she's under his clutches.
Yeah, the pact.
Yeah.
Deliver Unto Evil sounds like it should be the name of one of those schemes from the Archenemy product.
That's true. I mean, my favorite schemes from Archenemy were the Nicol Bolas ones, so.
Welcome to my evil lair.
Is that a...
It's approximately,
okay.
It's close.
All right.
How many words could it possibly be off?
Honestly?
Right. All of them, I guess, that's the ceiling. All right, players underway here. Breeding Pool versus Hallowed Fountain. No mana acceleration for Mullen on turn 2, just Forest go. Rosum once again online with a Hero Precinct 1. We do see End Step Growth Spiral. See if Mullen can put in a land. He will. Forest will go at his turn.
Yeah, so this is gives me the impression that Rosum went the complete 180 of what I thought he should do. Went a little more beat down. Almost certainly doesn't have Cry the Carnarium in his deck if you have Hero Precinct 1 still in there too.
Okay, Mullen makes his 4th land drop, casts Paradise Druid. Rossum's going to shock to 18 to cast a Narset. Mullen will negate that.
There's a couple reasons to negate that. In a lot of respects in this matchup, Narset's going to function a bit like a dig through time, and that if you can't pressure it, it's going to do some heavy lifting here. But if Collins had that Nissa Who Shakes the World wrapped up, I would have actually liked to have seen him let it resolve, attack here to threaten the Narset, see if Rosum wants to chump block, and then still be able to hold up the negate with the Paradise Druid plus that Forest.
Well, the way it played out, he did negate. Here's that Nissa, activates a Forest, attacks Rosum to 15. Rosum's turn will start with Thought Erasure, though he's really behind on board already. Sees a hand of 2 pretty good spells, too, Tamiyo and Idroid Crisis.
Yeah, that's the thing about Thought Erasure. It's really good when you're at parity or ahead on the battlefield and your opponent still has some juicy cards in hand. But here, with Collins already having access to Nissa Who Shakes the World in hand, and his cards are fairly redundant because the Tamiyo can just minus and get back that Hydroid Crisis or Negate or what have you, this is not looking good for Rosum.
This is a tough spot. Mullen's going to untap with a lot of mana here.
Oh, absolutely. All these forests and the Breeding Pool tap for double. So he can, let's see, he can definitely Tamiyo get back Negate and hold up Negate. That's easy mode. And here it looks like he's just going to get to have a giant Hydra Crisis. And that's also really bad.
Yeah, Rosum ends up taking that Tamiyo. Has the Elder Spell for the Nissa. All right. That makes the Crisis quite a bit worse.
Yeah. It's still going to be a 4/4 that draws 2 cards, though. And unless Rosum wants to double block with Hero, Collins also gets to get in some damage. Looks like Collins here just wants to make sure that he makes a 4/4 and draws an extra card.
So just tapping out for that Crisis. Draw 2 up to 22. I believe a backup Crisis was drawn.
Yeah, that's a nice one. He might have even drawn another Nissa Who Shakes the World, so that was a good refuel.
Right. Over to Jonathan Rosum. Isolated Chapels, land number 5. Here comes Teferi, Hero of Dominaria. Makes a token, plus his Teferi, draws a card.
Now he's going to get to untap, and that Crisis can only hit the Teferi for 4 currently, and the tokens and the Hero of Precinct 1 have the rest kind of covered as far as protection is concerned.
Ooh, mass manipulation among the holdings for Mullen. Has the mana to do that for 1 right now.
I believe he is 1 blue short.
Oh, yeah. Yeah,
four
3
blue
forests.
is restrictive.
That is pretty funny, yeah. That is tough to cast, even for a 2-color deck. So he's going to cast Nissa on tap of Forest. Make that a 3/3. Crisis and the 2 forests rumbling in.
Yeah, if I had to guess, all of them are coming at the Hero of Dominaria. So Rosum probably going to... Okay, so he's going to eat a land with a Hero and then chump block the other one. And then Teferi's going to go down to 1, it looks like.
Rosum considering whether he wants to throw the Hero away or not.
Yeah, I mean, there's an argument to double chump block, basically, but one of the easiest ways for you to beat the Simic Mass Manipulation deck is to constrict their mana, and by trading Hero and a token for the land, he effectively takes away 2 mana because of the Nissa Who Shakes the World.
So he ends up trading away the Hero. Teferi went to 1, back on Rosum's turn, cranks it up to 2, draws. Quite behind on the battlefield once again.
Yeah, that's kind of what happens when you let the Simic deck untap with roughly 6 mana and you have virtually no pressure. You know, he was able to cast a 4/4 Hydroid Crisis, hit super well off of it, including a second Nissa Who Shakes the World. And even though he's able to deal with 1, let's see if he can deal with another.
Here's a replacement Hero of Precinct 1 for Rosum. D-Spark. Take care of your Nissa, make a token. Plays Godless Shrine tap, untaps his 2 lands for Teferi. We'll go back Mullen's way.
It's interesting. I believe he has an Elder Spell, too, so he's valuing that ability to give loyalty pretty highly here, and I don't blame him. I think he could potentially steal the game if he's able to stick Teferi, Hero of Dominaria, Elder Spell, and get an emblem.
Yeah, that one definitely runs away with games. We've seen that combo before.
Yeah, he also, with the D-Spark, got to generate an extra 1/1 off of that Hero Precinct 1 as well to play a little more defense.
He's once again in a position where he can offer a trade with the land if it attacks. But he will just get attacked by Crisis in the land, and yeah, he does go ahead and trade Hero token. Teferi gets eaten by the Crisis.
Yeah, and all of a sudden, Collins is down here to only 4 mana, and you see what happens when you start trading Hero Precinct 1 for those lands. The Hydro Krasis is significantly smaller. Collins unable to cast 2 spells in the same turn.
Yep, Krasis for X equals 2, draws a card, gains a life, plays an island, go back over to Rosum.
See, and here, this is where I would very much like something like Kaya's Wrath, where you take care of both of these medium-sized threats with the Krasis, as well as the mana producer with Paradise Druid. Now, he may also have the Kaya's Wrath in his deck, but I do like that alternate sideboard plan where you just don't worry about Hero Precinct 1 and you're just heavy on sweepers. But with only 2 copies of Kaya's Wrath, he may have deemed it not worthwhile to go for that full-blown route and kind of play that halfway game on both sides.
Here's a Teferi Time Raveler that'll bounce the Paradise Druid. Rosum will draw. And no further action.
I think he drew either another Elder Spell or Command the Dreadhorde. I know it's a black card. I think it's Command the Dreadhorde, but he's going to go down to 7 life here from these attacks, and that's, or perhaps, and that's not really a high life total for Command the Dreadhorde.
Yeah, no kidding. Mullins will cast a Growth Spiral, puts in no land, attacks down that Time Raveler, and I believe 4 damage coming across as well from the big Krasis. And Paradise Druided, recast. Back to John Rosum. And the big Krasis did hit him. He is now at 9.
Yeah, I mean, he has the option to get back a few things with Command the Dreadhorde, but I don't think he has enough life to work with. In the previous game, he was at 21 when he was in the spot. And he was able to get back 5 or 6 permanents, and including like 3 Planeswalkers. But here, he can really only get back like 2 things or 3 small things, and I don't think that's enough against those really large flying Hydra Krasis.
Right. Yeah, if he grabs both Teferis, that'll put him to 1. You could clear the Krasises, but then the Druid just kills you.
Yeah, he's going to opt here to draw a card with Teferi, looking for a spot removal spell, I guess, for the 4/4 Krasis. Doesn't find it.
Finds a Duress. Casts that. Sees 2 Mass Manipulations, and Tamio picks up his cards.
Yeah, and that was more of a fishing for information duress than a let's continue playing the game duress. Occasionally you want to see if there's a sideboard card in your opponent's hand that you may have missed or perhaps haven't seen yet.
All right, so these players will be going to Game 3. Looks like Rosum might be reevaluating the sideboard.
Yeah, those Elder Spells looked like okay-ish, I guess. I think he just needs to figure out whether or not he wants to go that control plan because, I mean, so far we've seen a bit of success from the Esper Superheroes deck against mass manipulation just by constricting them on mana, and you can do that quite easily by killing their creatures, and Cry of the Carnarium and Kai's Wrath both do that well.
Previously, we saw Night Veil Predator come in this matchup. You can't mass manipulate it, and it can pressure Planeswalkers. Do you like that one on the play?
I still think it does enough. The 3/3 body doesn't line up that well against the 3/3s from Nisu Shakes the World, and it takes quite a while for you to actually eat away at that Nisu Shakes the World with the 3/3. And the reason why it's in the sideboard at all is because it's decent at killing the Planeswalkers that come in and tick down to 1 loyalty because it has hexproof.
All right. So if you're checking us out at home now, between games would be a good time, if you're not already subscribed, to check out the Star City Games newsletter. Free to subscribe at go.starcitygames.com/newsletter. You'll get highlights from some of the best articles over at starcitygames.com.
And me.
And Todd. Upcoming SCG Tour dates and locations as we go into Season 2 here. Star City Games Invitational qualifiers near you. Maybe qualify for the Invitational coming up for SCG Con Winter. Find out about game nights near you. A lot of free information. Really no reason not to subscribe.
Unless you have subphobia. Fear
I wonder what the...
subscriptions.
Is there like a word for that actually?
I don't know.
I bet it's long.
Like triskaidekaphobia.
Yeah, that's a nice card name.
Fear of the number 13. All right, both players shuffling up here. I'm very curious to see how Rosum sideboarded.
Yeah, we saw him on Hero Precinct 1 in game number 2.
It looked a bit anemic. I mean, it was there. It traded a little bit for the lands, but, you know, I would have been much happier in Rosum's spot if either of those heroes were a Kai's Wrath, you know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and trading for the lands, it made some inroads, but then eventually Mullen just used a lot of mana every turn, was able to run over.
Yeah, and Rosum, when he's trying to have a combination of threats and answers, sometimes you draw a few too many threats or the wrong answers. In that game, you know, he drew multiple heroes, a couple of planeswalkers that didn't really gain any traction. You know, Nissa, Who Shakes the World, is just such an insanely powerful card that, you know, you have to sometimes have a dynamic strategy in order to combat it.
Yeah, we saw him twice in that game cast discard spells when he was just kind of buried already on the table.
Yeah.
Thought Erasure after he was already under a Nissa, Duress right before his concession.
Yeah. You need those early, and you need those to take away the Nissa specifically in certain spots.
Looks like he did not like his opening 7. Rosum will be going to 6 on the play. Believe Mullen has locked in his 7.
Yeah, I'm not sure how good Mullen's 7 is, but, you know, he kept it pretty quickly.
Couple lands and some stuff that produces mana. Usually all you need to start.
Yeah, I saw Negate hanging out, so that could have a reasonable effect here by, like, maybe stifling a Teferi Time Raveler on turn. Mullen's is turn 2, but Jonathan's turn 3.
Negate plays pretty well with Growth Spiral if that's his acceleration.
Yeah, for sure.
All right, we'll see if Rosum ends up liking his 6 better. He does. He'll keep it.
Alrighty. It's pretty mana heavy, but I think that's okay in this matchup. Or no, it's only 3 lands, so looks like 3 land hero, Duress, and a Teferi. Which Teferi, I'm unsure. It's unclear.
Scry to the top, shocks to 18 with a Godless Shrine to start with that Duress. We're going to look at Mullen's hand. Breeding Pool, Llanowar Elves, Nissa Who Shakes the World, Island, Tameo, Collector of Tales, Negate, and I believe a second Nissa.
I think you would very much like to be able to take that Llanowar Elves, but unfortunately Duress is non-creature, non-land, so he's going to strip him of one of these Planeswalkers or the Negate. The problem is you can't really take the Nissa Who Shakes the World because there's 2 of them. The Negate makes sure that you can potentially resolve one of your answers to those Planeswalkers. But taking Tameo is not that bad either, I don't think. But
Take ended up being the Negate. We'll go over to Collins. Drew Growth Spiral for turn. He'll shock for Breeding Pool to 18, starting that Llanowar Elf.
it's pretty good because now on turn 2 you can hold up Negate and cast Growth Spiral.
And Rosum shocks again on turn 2. It's Hallowed Fountain. He's at 16 and casts Hero Precinct 1.
That was a heck of a draw. Collins really needs to hit some land. He's going to go Jade Light Ranger here, finds a land, and makes a 3/2 Jade Light.
Yep, found forests, put Llanowar Elves in the graveyard. We'll see what John Rosum can do about it. Third land will shock him to 14, another Godless Shrine.
Ow, 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 ow.
Teferi Time Raveler is cast. Makes a 1/1 off the hero, bounces Llanowar Elf, draws a card. Probably not interested in trading with that Jade Light Ranger. He passes back.
Yeah, I definitely think that he's looking to trade 2/2 for 3/2 here. And he might just go for the chump block route, especially if his hand is just a couple more multicolored cards.
Jade Light Ranger attacks the Teferi.
Now, he wants to keep the Time Raveler on the battlefield because it does stifle a potential counterspell if Mullen's able to have drawn one over the last couple turns. Also lets him maybe cast Thought Erasure or Duress during draw step to have a little more information.
Options here are kind of interesting for Rosum. Most aggressive trade will be Hero versus Jade Light. You get Chump Block, or you can let the Teferi go down. And that's where he lands. Teferi gets hit by the Ranger.
He chose to let the Teferi go down, I believe, because he has another Teferi Time Raveler in hand.
Mullen's cast Growth Spiral, puts in that forest he explores into, casts Llanowar Elf, and Memorial to Genius as land for turn. John Rosum attacks with the token and the hero, Mullen to 15.
Yeah, I believe we're just going to see a pass here. A Hero Precinct 1 and pass with Dovin's Veto on backup. That's going to let Rosum actually tempo out this draw from Mullens potentially by knocking off that Nissa Who Shakes the World.
Yeah, he knows about a bunch of Planeswalkers in hand, so that Veto is very likely to catch something this turn.
Yep.
Right, back to Collins Mullen. Starting with 5 mana on the turn. We know about 2 Nissas and a Tameo.
I think Colin's really just trying to figure out what card will draw a counterspell between the 2 planeswalkers in his hand, and which one he is more fine with getting hit with that counterspell. I think if I'm Mullins, with the redundant copy of the Nissa Who Shakes the World, I want to lead on that, because at some point the Nissa might be able to find you a mass manipulation if you really need to. Sorry, the Tamiyo might be able to find you a mass manipulation if you need it to. And it's just a redundant copy, and it uses more mana this turn.
So he'll play Hinterland Harbor, cast the second Nissa, and that does catch the Dovin's Veto. Rosum will make 2 tokens for his trouble. And Mullen, no attacks. We'll go back Rosum's way.
Yeah, but Rosum really needs to have a good turn this turn to push this advantage. He spent 2 mana to knock down 5 from Mullins while generating 2 bodies. If he has a way to clear this Jadelight Ranger, that'll let him attack with all of his creatures. This is a huge, huge draw for him.
It's very Time Raveler. 2 more tokens, bounce your Jadelight Ranger.
Yeah, and he's going to be able to shove in here with quite a few creatures. And I believe he even drew another Hero Precinct 1 and a land, so I guess he can go ahead and play that as well.
3 tokens and both heroes coming across. Trading with throwing the Land War Elves in front of any of this isn't very good. And there you see land, last card in hand, that 3rd Hero Precinct 1. Right, Mullins took a hit for 7 there. He's at 8. We know he's got some Planeswalkers in hand, but he's got a lot of ground to recover here.
Right. I think the Nissa Who Shakes the World's a fine play. It allows you to potentially pressure that Teferi while also generating a 3/3 body, but the Rosum's just gone so wide with these Hero Precinct 1 that it might not be enough. You know, he needs to generate multiple blockers this turn, or he's under a lot of pressure from all these creatures. And if Rosum just peels a removal cell, that might just seal the deal.
And we know that he has a Nissa and a Tamiyo in hand. It seems like something like Tamiyo is way too small of an impact on the battlefield to be a starting point here.
I agree. But with Nissa Who Shakes the World, it only gives him 1 more blocker. Like, he taps all his mana, untaps attacks, kills the Teferi, and then he has 2 blockers versus the... so he has to block 2 heroes, and then he still takes 7, and he's chump blocking with an elf and eating a hero. I mean, that's probably better than anything else he has access to right now, but still not great.
So he has Jadelight Ranger that was just bounced. Looks like a Hydroid Krasis in hand, though.
Ooh.
Not too much mana to work with.
Well, you can potentially go tap the Llanowar Elves and then just make slightly bigger Hydroid Krasis by untapping a forest.
He lands on casting that Nissa. Put that to 6, untap one of these lands to make it a 3/3. Basic forest is the choice.
All right, so he can actually go attack the Teferi here. I think I like that play. Before, well...
He's shocking to 6 for a breeding pool.
Interesting. Maybe he's just casting Jadelight and having extra blockers. Because the Jadelight's just blocking a hero, but that might actually end up killing him.
He might be rethinking that one. Gonna check on the math. So currently Rosum has 3 heroes and 5 tokens. So 5 tokens plus 2 heroes is lethal without the shock. Plus 1 is lethal if he does shock for the breeding pool.
Yeah, so he's going to choose to not shock, stay at 8. Doesn't even attack the Teferi.
Yep, so he tap breeding pool, pass. Rosum draws for turn.
A removal spell here is lethal.
Well, there's one. Teferi Hero Dominaria cannot cast it fast enough.
Yeah, it does say, what, non-land permanent, though, so he tucks the elf, swings in, and that's lethal. John Rosum takes the 2-1 on the back of triple Hero Precinct 1.
I like that instead of actually turning the creature sideways, he gestured as if he was going to.
Yeah.
John Rosum, though, 10-1 here
Yeah.
at the Season 1 Invitational.
A really well-played match from Rosum. I'll say this. As much as I talked down on the Hero Precinct 1s, they are great when you draw 2 or 3 of them, because then that starts to generate a little too much pressure for the Simic Mass Manipulation deck. Now, with that said, he did draw 3 that game, and they looked fantastic. So, you know, who am I? I might be wrong. I'm always, you know, fine being wrong. And when great players like Jonathan Rosum prove me wrong, even better.
Yeah, and John Rosum really making a deep run here. 1 more round of Standard with his Esper deck, and then he has 4 rounds of the Amulet Titan. Really pushing for a top 8 here. He just beat the player that was in first place in the tournament.
Yeah, I mean, knocking down Collins Mullen there, catapulting himself to a 10-1 record. 1 round of Standard to go, and then 4 rounds of Modern. And I think he is probably more comfortable with his Modern deck at this point than his Standard deck.
Yeah, with Standard deck certainly not letting him down, but Amulet Titan, that is definitely something that Rosum's working on a lot.
Oh, for sure. I don't know who all he works with specifically, but I do know that he has played quite a bit with this Amulet Titan deck over the last 6 months, and putting in the work and learning a new archetype when he's most familiar with things like Jeskai Control really shows a lot about his character, his willingness to be humble in the face of being wrong about a specific archetype, and being able to be a competent enough pilot to shift between archetypes in a format as dynamic and diverse as Modern. Really shows his character as well as his play skill.
Yeah, definitely both of those things. When you talk about the range of decks he's jumped from, Jeskai Control, Humans, Amulet Titan, is there even a card in common with those decks?
No.
Yeah, it's just a huge range there.
There's not.
Now in Standard, he pretty much just shows up with Teferi Hero of Dominaria every weekend, but he wins with it. So that's going well for him here.
I mean, if it ain't broke, don't fix it, And I mean, right now there's it's not really the traditional Esper deck that we're used to seeing over the last 8 or 9 months with, Teferi Hero of Dominaria being like the top end of this, control shell that features a bunch of counter spells. Instead, we have more of a mid-range strategy where you're kind of tapping out every turn. And of course, that's mostly due to Teferi Time Raveler kind of shutting down that counter spells, throughout all of the format. Negate got a lot worse with Time Raveler seeing a lot more play. Absorb basically became unplayable in the main deck because if you're on the draw,